Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell, and it is Thursday, March 21st, 2013. We are beyond the year of the apocalypse in the year 2013, beyond Thunderdome. No announcements today other than that I am pressing forward with the work on the sequel to Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. I've actually begun a couple of chapters. The first two chapters in a book are always the most difficult because they have to be blocked out very carefully in order to set up the rest of the book. So it's always the most time-consuming part of a book is writing the opening couple of chapters, but I have made a dent in it and progress is good. Hopefully I'll get this done and meet my publisher's deadline that he didn't bother informing me about. Anyway, that's the short announcement. I want to thank everybody for continued donations, prayers, especially given the computer situation. Hopefully we'll make it through this news and views in one take and not have to split it up like we have been having to do. I do think my computer is dying. I just don't know what to do about it right now. Anyway, a couple of news stories I want to talk about. One of them I will probably be additionally blogging about in written blogs on the website. But the first one is, and both of these stories, a lot of you have sent me these articles, and I do want to talk about both of them. The first one is this news from China that the Chinese government has established a eugenics factory to do two things. First of all, collect the DNA of geniuses, particularly Chinese and those of European Caucasian descent. So in other words, they're targeting two specific types of racial groups, the Chinese themselves and then Caucasian Europeans, to select the DNA of geniuses and breed enhanced people. And I want to read, I'll post the link to this article, I want to read a couple of things in this article that I think are rather disturbing before I give you my analysis of what I think may be going on here. It says, quote, according to a leading evolutionary biologist, the Chinese are engaging in a massive breeding operation with the aim of creating a breed of cognitively enhanced individuals. And what's more, the China-based eugenics factory recently bought up a large genome research institute in the United States, giving the Chinese access to the DNA of Americans. In a recent interview with Vice magazine, evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Miller admits to having donated his DNA to an endeavor headed up by the world's largest genetic research institution based in China's Shenzhen province. Miller, by his own admission, is one of 2,000 brainiacs selected by IBG Shenzhen for their transhumanist project. Asked how the company goes after potential DNA contributors, Miller answers, they seem mostly interested in people of Chinese and European descent. Now, the point of this is made in the middle of the article where this individual, Jeffrey Miller, states, quote, even if it only boosts the IQ of the average kid by 5 points, that's a huge difference in terms of economic productivity, the competitiveness of the country, how many patents they get, how their businesses are run, and how innovative their economy is. And then I want to go to the very end of this article where it points out that this sort of thinking has been in the mind of the global elite for quite some time, and in fact it cites the example of Herman Daly of the World Bank, who also maintained that we should genetically breed smaller people to eat less food, have higher metabolism, and be more productive. Alright? Now, let's look at what this means. On the website, I've been blogging for quite some time about the transhumanist phenomenon, and specifically about the role of agencies like DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency in the United States, in the deliberate evolution of enhanced human beings, giving them enhanced night vision, virtually, in other words, creating night vision eyes, giving people the ability to communicate with each other telepathically via implants or whatever, giving people enhanced strength so that they don't require sleep. You can imagine the advantages of this on the battlefield. Again, it's enhancing the productivity, so to speak, of a soldier who doesn't require as much sleep as an enemy combatant's soldiers or army would. So in other words, this is conceived by DARPA and the Pentagon as being a force multiplier. So in other words, the transhumanist arms race has begun. And this is China's way of signaling the fact that they're viewing the transhumanist arms race, so to speak, not so much in just military terms, but also in economic terms. They mean this to enhance their economic efficiency, their productivity, and their creativity. All right. Now, I would go so far as to suggest that you can't have genuine creativity without the cultural context that a basically free society provides. So they may be playing with fire here. But I think we're going to see more of this, not less of this, in the future, and particularly between China and the United States now, as both nations race to introduce the transhumanist agenda even on a larger scale than we've seen in society thus far. I think now we're going to see this really being kicked into high gear. The race for the enhanced human being is on. This is the new superiority, much in the same way as nuclear weapons were back during the early stages of the Cold War. Now, I want to turn to a completely different story. Pardon me. And I don't have a bunch of articles to talk about in this part of the news and views. And the reason why is that so many of you sent me articles on this story. I literally have not even yet begun to adequately go through them all and be able to make a detailed analysis. I have made a kind of a general analysis of what's going on. And this is the story of the rumored seizure of the deposits of depositors in banks in Cyprus. All right. Now, this to me is a story that really bears very close watching. If we look at the run-up to this banking crisis, at least in Europe's terms, we have two primary factors, in my opinion, that have contributed to the crisis. First of all, and many of you may not like what I'm about to say, but nonetheless I think it's true. First of all, you have the European socialist state, and this became something that in Greece's case, in Italy's case, Spain's case, grew dramatically out of control. And with this, the ability of these economies to, I think we may have froze up on the computer again. Hello, come on computer. Sorry folks, if this is actually going through, my screen is completely frozen. Come on, there we go. Alright, sorry about that. My screen froze for a moment, folks. But European socialism, they ran up massive deficits beyond the ability of politicians to make good, and that has affected the banking system. So in a certain sense, the banksters have always had the attitude, alright, if we're loaning you all this money, when it comes to the point that your governments can't pay up, we're going to seize your assets. In other words, they're looking at it just like if you sign a loan for a car and you don't make your payments, what do? They come and seize the car. So in a certain sense, that's how they're looking at this. But this is the second point. The banksters themselves have made matters much, much worse, and in fact criminally so, by credit default swaps, mortgage frauds, and leveraging all of this paper to an extraordinary degree. In fact, before I started this news and views, I was reading an article to kind of prepare for this talk that indicate that European banks are leveraged 26 to 1. So in other words, they don't have the cash to make good their commitments, and they're just going to steal it from people, and in this case, Cyprus. Now there's a third factor that's going on in Cyprus's case, and this to me is the most interesting, because after the crisis began, not initially, but it began to be reported later, that Russian oligarchs and mafiosi and so on were hiding a lot of their funds in Cypriot banks, all right, and that this was the Western elite's way of seizing that money. So in other words, it was part of the ongoing war between the kind of Russian authoritarian nationalist government of Putin, which has been trying to eliminate that influence of the Western bankers, particularly the Rothschild interest inside of Russia, and the Western bankers. All right. So in other words, this was the way some people were spinning the story. Now, as that story was unfolding, it emerged that these oligarchs had actually removed their money prior to the attempt to confiscate that money by seizing 10% of the depositors in savings in Cyprus. So in other words, the other thing that's happening now is that Russia, Medvedev and Putin have both come out and made very strong statements about this action signaling the weakness of the Western financial system. And here's an interesting thing. In one article that I saw, it is even reported that the Russians have offered to Cyprus to bail them out. So in other words, Russia's now playing the savior, and that's an interesting precedent, because let's look at what Cyprus means in terms of the wider European community. If this same approach was being floated in Cyprus as a test to see what they might be able to get away with in Greece, in Italy, in Spain, then the experiment has failed. And what it may signal is Russia's increasing use of playing the white knight in order to crack up the European Union and assume a greater influence in European affairs, which has long been a Russian goal, particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. All right? So this is one to watch very, very carefully. It also finally, in my opinion, signals something else, folks, and that is an increasing hostility on the part of the southern European nations, the so-called PIGS nations. An increasing hostility on their part, rightfully so, I would think, to the austerity measures that are coming out of Berlin that they want to impose on the rest of Europe in order to save the euro and to save German influence in the European Union. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, and particularly between Germany and Russia now. So those are the two countries to watch very carefully. That's it for my news and views this week, folks, and I want you again to kind of watch for my written blogs. I probably will be saying more about Cyprus and Russia in greater detail on the written blogs on the website. Anyway, that's it, folks. God bless, and thank you for your prayers, donations. We'll see you on the flip side.